The Oscars is the big one.
It's the big one. And so you wonder about it. And so you get a sense of what's going on in some of the candidates and some of the actors who would be participate in it. But
at 85, Al Pacino has nothing left to prove. And yet he still talks about movies like a student in a classroom, not a legend on a pedestal. Across 60 years in Hollywood, he's played kings and killers, poets and policemen. But beneath every performance is a man still in awe of cinema itself. Pacino once said, "I still go to the movies to learn." That curiosity, not fame or power, is what has kept him vital for half a century. In interviews from the American Film Institute to recent Q&As, Pacino has occasionally opened up about the films closest to his heart. Some are his own, roles that tested his soul, while others are masterpieces that rekindled his faith in storytelling. Together, they reveal a portrait of an artist driven by contradictions, a lover of chaos and control, violence and poetry, realism and dreams. In this countdown, we revisit the 7 films Pacino has called his favorites, movies he either starred in or still watches with admiration. Each one offers a window into his craft and his soul. Stay until the end to discover which film he calls the most fun he ever had, and which gritty classic still defines his career. So grab your popcorn and your faith in great storytelling, because we're about to step inside the films that Al Pacino himself can't forget. Number 7, Serpico, 1973. When audiences first met Frank Serpico in 1973, they weren't just seeing another crime thriller, they were witnessing Al Pacino transform truth into fire. Directed by Sidney Lumet, Serpico is based on the real-life story of a New York City cop who risked everything to expose corruption within his own department. The film opens with Serpico lying bleeding in the back of a squad car, sirens screaming through Manhattan.
This is car 2118, call Greenpoint.
From there, Lumet rewinds time to show how a young, idealistic officer became a pariah among his peers. As Serpico moves through precincts filled with bribery and cynicism, his refusal to take payoffs isolates him completely. Friends turn against him, supervisors look away, and danger closes in. In the film's most harrowing moment, Serpico is shot in the face during a raid after fellow officers conveniently fail to back him up. He survives, scarred but unbroken, and testifies before the Knapp Commission, dragging decades of dirty secrets into daylight.
Permanent investigative body dealing with police corruption like this commission is essential.
Pacino later said simply, "I thought Serpico was a pretty good movie." That understatement masks how deeply the role meant to him. Coming off the success of The Godfather, he could have played another gangster and coasted on fame. Instead, he chose a story about moral courage, a man who couldn't be bought or bent. Lumet's handheld camera, gritty streets, and natural light turn New York into a living organism, a city that tests every conscience that walks its pavements. Pacino's performance feels lived in, restless, almost improvised. He grew his hair long, wore his own clothes, and roamed the city to absorb its rhythm. Critics praise the raw authenticity. Roger Ebert wrote that Pacino never seems to be acting at all. That transparency made Frank Serpico not just a character, but a mirror for police, politicians, and ordinary viewers wrestling with their own sense of right and wrong. The film earned Pacino an Oscar nomination and cemented his status as the conscience of 1970s cinema. Decades later, real-life Serpico called Pacino's portrayal accurate down to the smallest gesture. It remains one of those rare performances where actor and subject seem fused by a single heartbeat: outrage, loneliness, integrity. For Pacino, Serpico is about standing alone when standing alone costs everything. In a world of backroom deals and whispered compromises, he made honesty cinematic. Do you see Serpico as a moral fable, a psychological study, or both? Would you have had the strength to do what Frank Serpico did? Share your thoughts below. Number 6, The Local Stigmatic, 1990. Long before Al Pacino became a cultural icon, he was a theater purist. He loved the intimacy of a small stage, the rawness of performance, and the danger of silence between lines. The local stigmatic is the closest he ever came to bottling that energy on film. It isn't famous, it wasn't made for awards or box office glory. But for Pacino, this short 52-minute project remains one of his proudest achievements, a reminder of why he fell in love with acting in the first place. Adapted from a 1966 stage play by British poet and playwright Heathcote Williams, the film follows two working-class Londoners, Graham and Ray.
Have to be a small table. You're getting very kittenish, huh?
They drift through pubs and betting shops talking about greyhound racing, fame, and resentment. Their conversations sound casual, even meaningless, until you realize they're building toward an act of violence against a celebrity they've fixated on. The story unfolds like a nightmare overheard through laughter. Part social commentary, part psychological study of envy. There are no sweeping camera moves, no score, no moral resolution, just two men and the weight of their bitterness. Pacino didn't just star in it, he produced it, financed it, and shaped it with obsessive care. He once told The Hollywood Reporter, "It's not for everybody, but it was personal. I can just sit here and think, and maybe I would hold everybody's attention." That line sums up his philosophy: performance as meditation. Acting not as entertainment, but as truth-seeking. When the local stigmatic finally surfaced, most audiences didn't know what to make of it. Critics were divided. Some called it self-indulgent, others hailed it as daring. Yet even its harshest reviewers admitted they'd never seen Pacino so stripped of glamour. There's no movie star polish here. His character, Graham, mumbles, mutters, and erupts without warning. An unsettling presence that feels frighteningly real. For Pacino, that rawness was the point. The film examines what happens when working-class dreams collide with celebrity culture, a theme that fascinated him long before social media magnified it. In many ways, the local stigmatic predicted the modern obsession with fame and resentment. Watching it today feels eerily prophetic. Pacino has revisited the project over the years, screening it for acting students and describing it as a lesson in vulnerability. "It's not about being liked," he once said. "It's about being honest." Have you ever been drawn to an unconventional or obscure film simply because of its honesty? What makes raw, imperfect storytelling more powerful than polished spectacle? Number 5, Looking for Richard, 1996. By the mid-1990s, Al Pacino had nothing left to prove as an actor. He'd already conquered crime dramas, thrillers, and epic sagas. Yet, deep down, he was still chasing something more elusive. A connection between Shakespeare's language and the modern soul. That pursuit became Looking for Richard, a hybrid film that blurs the line between documentary and performance, intellect and instinct, art and obsession. Pacino not only directed Looking for Richard, but also produced and co-wrote it. The film dives into Richard III, one of Shakespeare's most psychologically complex plays, by showing both rehearsals and final performances. We see Pacino roaming the streets of New York, interviewing strangers about Shakespeare, debating meaning with fellow actors like Alec Baldwin, Kevin Spacey, and Winona Ryder, and reflecting on what drives human ambition.
And who's moving in on Shakespeare now? The Japanese, because they're kicking the Americans' ass. And they're all interested in Shakespeare all of a sudden.
The result feels less like a film and more like a living workshop, a search for why these 400-year-old words still cut so deep. When asked by The Hollywood Reporter to name his favorite works, Pacino included Looking for Richard without hesitation. "It had an outing," he said proudly. "And it did pretty good, I thought." That modest phrasing hides the magnitude of what the film achieved. For Pacino, this wasn't about box office numbers. It was about rediscovering purpose. He once called the film a love letter to Shakespeare and an attempt to make Shakespeare accessible to everyone. Behind the scenes, Pacino was relentless. He rehearsed scenes obsessively, often blending spontaneous street interviews with intense table reads. In one memorable moment, he interrupts a heated debate about Richard III to declare, "It's about power, and the way we all hunger for it." That hunger echoes through every frame. By exposing the messy process of creation, Looking for Richard becomes a meditation on art itself, why we keep trying, failing, and returning to the words that define us. Critics praised the film's ambition, calling it a gateway drug to Shakespeare. Others noted how Pacino's passion made the dense text human again. Not a lecture, but a conversation. For students and actors, it remains a masterclass in curiosity and humility. Looking for Richard may not be Pacino's most famous project, but it's arguably his most personal. It reveals the teacher behind the performer, a man still wrestling with the craft that made him. In chasing Richard's ghost, Pacino found himself. Did Looking for Richard change the way you see Shakespeare? Would you watch more films where actors break the fourth wall to explore their art? Number 4. Singin' in the Rain, 1952. When Al Pacino was asked to name a film that always made him smile, he didn't choose a crime epic or an intense drama. Instead, he grinned and said simply, "Singin' in the Rain is good, yeah." That brief but telling comment reveals something essential about Pacino. Beneath the gravitas and brooding characters, he has a deep admiration for pure cinematic joy. Released in 1952, Singin' in the Rain captures a pivotal moment in Hollywood history. The chaotic transition from silent films to talkies. Gene Kelly stars as Don Lockwood, a matinee idol struggling to adapt when his studio begins making sound pictures. His co-star, the shrill-voiced Lena Lamont, becomes an accidental villain when her grating tone threatens to derail their careers.
I'm singing in the rain, just singing in the rain.
To save the production, Don teams up with his best friend Cosmo Brown, Donald O'Connor, and aspiring actress Kathy Selden, Debbie Reynolds. They secretly have Kathy dub Lena's dialogue and songs, transforming disaster into triumph. The result is one of the most infectious musicals ever made. Pacino has said that he grew up watching movies that made the heart bigger, and Singin' in the Rain fits that ideal perfectly. It's a film about reinvention, about artists trying to survive change. Don Lockwood's struggle mirrors that of every performer facing a new era, whether it's sound in 1927 or streaming in 2025. For Pacino, who has lived through multiple revolutions in acting and filmmaking, the film's optimism rings true. Talent endures, technology shifts, and the show goes on. The famous title sequence, Gene Kelly twirling through puddles with an umbrella, represents everything Pacino values about cinema. Movement, emotion, and authenticity. Kelly's grin isn't just happiness, it's artistic liberation. Pacino once said he admired performers who let the body talk, and Kelly's dance is exactly that, a monologue of joy told without words. Critics have long hailed Singin' in the Rain as the greatest musical ever made, but for Pacino it's more than that. It's a film that proves movies can lift the spirit without losing sincerity. In a career filled with brooding anti-heroes and moral dilemmas, Pacino's affection for this Technicolor classic reminds us that he's still, at heart, a fan. A man who loves to lose himself in the simple pleasure of storytelling. Which film gives you that same feeling of effortless joy? And do you think Hollywood still produces movies that radiate the pure optimism of Singin' in the Rain? Number 3, The Tree of Wooden Clogs, 1978. When asked about his favorite movies, Al Pacino often surprises people. He doesn't just praise Hollywood classics. He talks about quiet, poetic films that seem worlds away from the explosive intensity of his own performances. One title he always mentions with particular affection is Ermanno Olmi's The Tree of Wooden Clogs. During an interview with the American Film Institute, when Pacino was asked to name his favorite film, he smiled and admitted, "I always like The Tree of Wooden Clogs." For a man whose characters often live on the edge of chaos, this gentle Italian drama might seem like an odd choice, but that's exactly why it reveals so much about who Pacino truly is. Released in 1978, The Tree of Wooden Clogs is a cornerstone of Italian neorealism, the cinematic movement that prized ordinary life over spectacle. Shot in rural Lombardy using non-professional actors, the film follows 4 peasant families sharing a single farmhouse in the late 19th century. Their days are filled with backbreaking labor, tending fields, washing clothes, caring for children. Yet Olmi captures it all with reverence and grace. There's little plot in the traditional sense, but there is deep emotion. The film's quiet climax comes when one desperate father cuts down a tree belonging to the landlord to carve a pair of wooden clogs for his son so the boy can walk to school. That small act of love leads to his family's eviction, but also to one of the most powerful scenes of dignity ever filmed. For Pacino, who came from humble beginnings in the Bronx, the film's portrayal of working-class endurance hit home. He said in several interviews that he's drawn to stories about survival, not in the glamorous, cinematic sense, but in the human one. The Tree of Wooden Clogs reflects the same empathy that runs through his performances in Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico, a fascination with people doing their best within a world stacked against them. Pacino once remarked that he's captivated by films that make you feel life passing through you. Olmi's masterpiece does exactly that. Its long takes, natural light, and unhurried rhythm allow audiences to sink into a world where every moment, a harvest, a prayer, a song, feels sacred. It's the opposite of the fast-talking, adrenaline-fueled roles Pacino is known for, and perhaps that's why he treasures it so much. Do you find quiet, slow-paced films like The Tree of Wooden Clogs more powerful because of their realism? Which modern movies capture everyday life with the same authenticity? Number 2, Dick Tracy, 1990. When audiences think of Al Pacino, they picture raw intensity. Michael Corleone's quiet menace, Tony Montana's explosive fury, or Frank Serpico's moral fire. That's why it still surprises fans that the role Pacino says he enjoyed the most wasn't a tortured anti-hero at all, but a cartoonish gangster straight out of a comic strip. In multiple interviews and Q&As, Pacino has said that his performance as Big Boy Caprice in Dick Tracy was the most fun I ever had on a film. Coming from a man who spent his career buried in tragedy and conflict, that statement speaks volumes. Directed and produced by Warren Beatty, Dick Tracy was a bold experiment, a live-action comic book shot entirely in bright primary colors to mimic its 1930s newspaper strip origins. The film follows heroic detective Dick Tracy, Beatty, as he takes on the grotesque mob boss Big Boy Caprice and his stable of oddball henchmen, Flat Top, Itchy, Pruneface, and more. Pacino's Big Boy is the ringleader, a swaggering egomaniac obsessed with culture and control. Under heavy prosthetics that distorted his face, Pacino leaned fully into the absurdity, screaming orders, dancing in a tuxedo, and quoting philosophers one moment before erupting in comic rage the next. Critics were divided about the movie's exaggerated tone, but almost everyone agreed that Pacino stole the show. Roger Ebert compared his performance to a vaudeville explosion of energy, calling him the one actor who truly understood the film's heightened reality. Pacino didn't hold back. He treated Big Boy as a living cartoon, yet infused him with the manic insecurity of a man desperate to prove he's smarter than everyone else. It's an inspired parody of the kind of villains Pacino had played straight for years. In retrospect, Dick Tracy feels like Pacino giving himself permission to play again. After decades of carrying heavy emotional roles, he embraced the chance to laugh at his own intensity. In a behind-the-scenes clip, you can see him improvising lines, gesturing wildly, and cracking up the crew, a reminder that beneath the legend is an actor who still loves to play. The film went on to win 3 Academy Awards for art direction, makeup, and original song, and became a cult favorite for its daring visuals. Pacino's joyful exaggeration remains one of its most memorable elements, proving that great acting isn't always about restraint. Sometimes it's about unleashing pure theatrical chaos. Do you like seeing serious actors cut loose in comedic or stylized roles? Which dramatic performer do you think could pull off a Big Boy Caprice-style transformation today? Number 1, Scarface, 1983. Few performances have defined a generation like Al Pacino's Tony Montana in Scarface. It's the role that became an icon of excess, ambition, and self-destruction. And for Pacino himself, it remains the film closest to his heart. During a 2025 Q&A after a Dog Day Afternoon screening, Pacino was asked to name the one project that still haunts him. He smiled and said, "Nothing touches Scarface." Then he explained why. As a young man in Los Angeles, he had wandered into a revival theater showing Howard Hawks' 1931 original and was mesmerized by Paul Muni's intensity. I went in because I'd heard about Howard Hawks' Scarface. Paul Muni, who was in his time one of the greatest actors alive, Pacino recalled. The experience lit a fire. I gotta do this film. I feel responsible for it. That sense of responsibility became obsession. Pacino convinced producer Marty Bregman to remake the film and worked with director Brian De Palma and screenwriter Oliver Stone to reinvent it for the cocaine-soaked 1980s. The story of Tony Montana, a Cuban refugee who claws his way up from dishwasher to drug lord, mirrored America's own addiction to wealth and power. When Tony snarls, "The world is yours," it's both a promise and a curse. Pacino poured every ounce of theatrical energy into the role. The slurred accent, the volcanic temper, the tragic pride. He later admitted he nearly burned out filming the climactic mansion shootout, injuring himself while firing the machine gun that became an emblem of pop culture rebellion. For Pacino, Scarface was never just about violence. It's a story about a man who wanted more than the world could give him, he said in an interview. And it destroyed him. He recognized Tony Montana as a tragic figure. Someone intoxicated by the American dream, but doomed by his own ego. That Shakespearean quality, the fall of a man who mistakes greed for greatness, is what made Pacino love the film long after the cameras stopped rolling. Critics were divided in 1983, but Scarface found its audience in the decades that followed. Rappers, athletes, and entrepreneurs adopted Tony Montana as a symbol of ruthless ambition, while filmmakers cited the movie's operatic energy as a template for modern gangster cinema. Pacino's Tony became myth, quoted, parodied, and immortalized on dorm room posters worldwide. For Pacino, though, the legacy remains personal. Scarface wasn't just another hit, it was the movie that proved an actor's passion could rewrite an entire genre. Do you see Scarface as a cautionary tale or a celebration of ambition? What do you think makes Tony Montana's rise and fall so timeless? Looking over Al Pacino's 7 favorite films, a clear picture emerges, not just of a legendary actor, but of a man who spent his entire life chasing truth through performance. His list is an emotional map of his career. Scarface for ambition, Serpico for integrity, Looking for Richard for self-reflection, Dick Tracy for playfulness, and The Tree of Wooden Clogs for compassion. Together, these choices show that Pacino's love of cinema isn't confined to any genre, style, or era. He's as drawn to the spectacle of gangster epics as he is to the quiet poetry of Italian neo-realism. What stands out most is Pacino's humility. Despite decades of critical acclaim, he rarely mentions the roles that made him a global icon. Instead, he speaks like a student of the art, still curious, still searching. When he talks about films like Singin' in the Rain or The Tree of Wooden Clogs, there's no distance between the Hollywood legend and the kid from the Bronx who fell in love with movies. That passion never left him. Even now at 85, Pacino still attends screenings, quotes dialogue from memory, and laughs about the big risks that didn't always work. In his words, acting isn't about fame or power. It's about staying alive inside the story. That's what connects all his favorite films, whether they're about mobsters, peasants, detectives, or dreamers. They pulse with life, with humanity. So next time you watch one of these movies, don't just look for the actor Al Pacino. Look for the person who still believes in the magic of storytelling. Because as Pacino himself once said, the camera is a mirror. It shows you who you are and who you wish you could be.